Happening, folks, and welcome to the channel. I busted out my Range Rover for today's review because apparently this place is crawling with trolls. Whatever. Trolls schmoles. This thing is impenetrable. As you may have just seen in the intro, Cardboard Kenny suggested this week's movie. And today of all days happens to be his birthday. So happy birthday, Mr. Cardboard, and thanks very much for this great recommendation.
Trollhunter is a 2010 Norwegian dark fantasy creature feature found footage mockumentary movie. It's written and directed by Andre Overdahl, and it features a cast of relatively unknown actors and some better-known Norwegian comedians.
Some people thought this movie's originality helped it transcend the found footage subgenre completely, while other people thought this movie's novelty wore off around the halfway point. Let's take a look at Trollhunter's plot and we can decide whether...
The movie opens with college students Thomas, Johanna, and Kalle, and they're just getting started on a documentary about a suspected bear poacher named Hans. They kick the documentary off by interviewing a group of local hunters. They're gathered at the location of yet another dead bear that appears to have been slain illegally. All the hunters agree this guy Hans they keep seeing everywhere is giving off a real poacher vibe. But they're also confused about the bear itself, as the tracks leading to and from its carcass don't fully add up. But Finn Haugen, the head of the Norwegian Wildlife Board, assures everybody that everything is above board with the dead bear. So, their gut instincts leading the way, the young documentarians head off after Hans the suspected poacher, just the way journalists used to do, way back when journalism was still considered a respectable career. And while they're tailing Hans from a safe distance, we're treated to shots of some of Norway's most beautiful mountains and forests and fjords. These stunning landscapes feature prominently throughout the film, and they play a huge role in helping establish Trollhunter's earthy atmosphere. And once they're all safely secured on the same ferry, Thomas corners the man and simply asks him if he shot the bear earlier that day. But Hans politely tells him to fuck off. And you'll probably be very surprised to find out that is how Norwegians say fuck off. But Thomas isn't going to give up that easily, so he reminds everybody Michael Moore was probably told to fuck off lots of times at the start of his career, and that observation's enough, somehow, to keep the crew enthusiastic. They continue to follow Hans until they end up in the middle of nowhere in their car, in the dark, cold, without a clue as to where he went or where they are themselves.
Poor things. I can't imagine what that must feel like.
So they get out of the car with all their gear and they start looking for him, and eventually they find his Range Rover, but he's not in it. Then a bright flashing light goes off on the other side of the hill, and something starts growling, and whatever it was, it's big. Then Hans appears from the darkness and he screams, So they all take off, even though they've no idea what the hell's going on. And back at the Rover, Hans treats Thomas for a suspected bear bite he suffered in the melee. And then he brings them all back to their car, and when they get there, Thomas thinks that must have been one hell of an angry bear for his car to have ended up in that state.
If young Thomas had half a brain, he'd have scored himself one of these Range Rovers. Gravity can't even turn these things upside down. Shit. Are you fucking kidding me? This thing won't start 5 seconds after I acted like I was sponsored by Range Rover. No signal on my phone. Now even my reviews are full of horror tropes. Oh, excellent. Good stuff. Cheers for the suggestion, Cardboard Kenny, buddy old pal.
Hans finally tells him he's not a bear hunter at all, and he's actually looking for trolls. So naturally, Thomas and the gang ask Hans to allow them to film whatever he's doing, and Hans grants them permission, provided they agree to do exactly what he says when he says it without asking any questions. And they all agree. After they've all got some sleep and tidied themselves up, they get ready to go. But before they can leave, Hans needs to confirm there's no Christians in the gang.
According to Norwegian folklore, the scent of Christian blood actually angers trolls. Most people can cover up their people smell with troll stench, but there's no escape for God's children in this folktale.
And with the godliness issue out of the way, Hans offers them all one last chance to back out before they get started, but everybody's up for it. First on their list of to-dos for the evening, everyone has to wash away their own body odor in the river and cover themselves in a thick smattering of troll stank. And after they've all greased up, Hans explains one of his weapons emits a powerful beam of UV light which emulates the sun, because as everybody knows, sunlight turns trolls into stone, or it can make them explode. Hans phones his veterinarian friend and says somebody or something has chased this particular Ringlefinch troll from his territory, and he can tell that because it's been pissing everywhere. And seeing as Hans suggests the troll is acting as if it's sick, his veterinarian friend tells him to get a blood sample.
This movie features 4 different types of trolls, and each of them is based directly on Norwegian mythology. And to keep with tradition, the director based the appearance of the trolls on the actual mythological creatures, instead of just turning it into the next generic snarling CGI thing you'd forget about before you even left the theater.
So Hans instructs Thomas and Kalle and Johanna to wait outside the forest while he chases the troll out. And while he's gone, the crew laughs at the poor old man behind his back for actually believing in trolls. And right in the middle of a good belly laugh, the ground rumbles. Then the sky growls, and everybody stops laughing. Hans runs back screaming at them to get the hell back to the car because apparently they've happened upon a tosser lad. And that's way worse than the Ringlefinch they thought they were chasing. Sure enough, the 3-headed giant breaks through the tree line, and it's none too happy to see them. Following Hans's lead, they get back to his truck where he blasts it with UV rays, turning it into a huge stone sculpture and definitely not a virtual 3D model. They spend what's left of the morning smashing the petrified troll into tiny little rocks so the public don't wander past it and figure out what happened. And right as they're finishing off, Finn Haugen pulls in. And he's pissed because he's actually Hans's boss from the troll security service. And his crew comes in with a dead bear to help divert the public's attention. He's the one who's been messing up the bear tracks and confusing all the hunters. Thomas puts his foot down and asks Hans to tell him exactly what's actually going on. And Hans tells him he works for the government, killing any troll that breaks out of its territory. His boss Finn's job is to make sure the public never finds out trolls really exist. And up until now, they've done exactly that. They had their breakfast, and Thomas starts feeling a tad nauseous, so he skips the food and asks Hans about the trolls themselves. He says the 2 main groups of trolls are mountain and woodland, and each group is divided into subgroups: Ringlefinch, Tosserlad, and Rhyme Tosser. And as much as I would love to take credit for some of these ridiculous names, I'm not making any of them up. Hans says trolls can live well over 1,000 years, and there's many different variations of them, and the ones with multiple heads develop the heads as they age, and the additional heads are meant to scare off other trolls or impress the ladies. Then he introduces Thomas to the joys of TSS paperwork and bureaucracy, and when Thomas asks about any similarities with fairy tale trolls, Hans makes it very clear these are real animals and they're no laughing matter. They stop into Hans's trailer before they head back out to hunt the next troll, and they find the insides of it stuffed with troll tails and fur in hopes of him smelling as close to a troll as he possibly can. And if the looks on everyone's faces are anything to go by, he's doing an amazing job. They check the troll traps, and although they've not been tripped, some smaller trolls have stolen the bait from them. So he refills each of the traps with charcoal and concrete, which is like sushi to them apparently. The following morning, Hans announces he's found the Ringlefinch's tracks, and there happen to be a load of sheep carcasses nearby as well. So while Finn and his crew swoop in to blame everything on another bear carcass, Hans and the crew leave live goats out to attract the troll's attention. And it works. And one of the goats ends up hors d'oeuvres. So Hans tries drawing the troll out from under the bridge with a bucket full of blood. And that works too. But when he goes in for the blood sample, he gets knocked out cold. But he's done this a million times, so he gets back up again, and when he goes back in for a second attempt, he gets it, right before he blasts the troll with a potent burst of UV light. They take the huge blood samples back to Hildy, the veterinarian, and she explains trolls can't convert vitamin D from sunlight into calcium, and that is why their bodies overreact when they're exposed to bright light. And for some reason, that actually makes sense to me. As a veterinarian, she explains how much it upsets her these poor animals have to experience such pain. And she's very believable.
A lot of Trollhunter's success can be attributed to the movie's relative realism. Director Andre Overdahl encouraged each of the actors to improvise action and dialogue wherever they thought it made sense to do so. And the relaxed tone that created really comes across in a lot of the scenes.
Back in the trailer again, Hans shows them how he tracks the trolls through local newspapers, because apparently they're the real cause of a lot of the disasters people attribute to nature, like roads disappearing into sinkholes or bridges randomly collapsing. And while Thomas is sifting through some of Hans's sketches, he comes across an image of a gigantic troll, and Hans confirms it's called a Jotnar and it really does exist. They head out to check a nearby territory, and while they're loading up the truck with tires, Hans takes the camera crew aside to explain a huge dent in the side of one of the tire containers. And this is another example of the director encouraging the actors to just make things up as they went along. None of this was in the original script. Actor Otto Jespersen spotted the big dent in the container and he just went for it. Then they head to a farm that was on the news because Hans suspects a troll was responsible for some of the damage done to the property. The property owner was told by mysterious men with fancy satellite images the damage was caused by a tornado. But even the farmer knows that would mean all the trees would need to be facing the same direction. Hans suggests at least 3 trolls ran through the area towards the north, and on further inspection he finds all the proof he needs in the copious quantities of troll piss. So they return to the area that night to track them down. When they get there, Callie, the otherwise quiet cameraman, gets a bad feeling and tells him he doesn't want to follow Hans into the forest. But he's talked into it anyway, against his will. They end up inside an abandoned mine. Everyone's uneasy, especially Callie. It turns out they're right to be uneasy because they've wandered into a troll's lair. The instant they realize it, dozens of them return to the cave, trapping the crew inside. So they retreat to the back of the cave and cover themselves in as much troll stank as possible. But it's pointless, because Callie's been keeping a secret the whole time. He's a Christian, and the trolls can smell him. They scramble towards the cave entrance, and everybody makes it except Callie, who ends up a meal. In the aftermath, Hans tells them he has to continue on to one more location to find out why all these trolls keep leaving their territories. He offers to drop Johanna and Thomas off, given what's just happened to Calais, but they don't want to quit. Finn's waiting for them back at Hans's trailer, and he forces Hans to head right into the heart of the trolls' dangerous territory. And when Finn tells Johanna to stop filming them talking, she loses her cool over the fact Collie's just died and everyone wants to keep this troll stuff a secret. And after the mini bust-up, they decide to finish the project with another camera operator. And she's Muslim, which Hans figures is probably fine as far as the trolls are concerned. So they pimp the Range Rover out with sharp corners and scary spikes, and they head out into the heart of Troll Town. And Hans can tell immediately one of the 200-foot-tall Jotnar trolls has done all of the damage. And when the new girl asks them if they all actually believe in trolls, their faces pretty much say everything. Further yet into the territory, Hans explains the power lines aren't actually power lines, but an elaborate electric fence system to keep the trolls contained. Eventually, they hole up in a TSS cabin where they sit tight and wait for a sign. And while they're waiting, the radio says there's been over 1,000 earthquakes recorded in the area. And of course, we know they're not earthquakes. Before the action kicks off, Thomas records a little private aside in which he conveys his belief that Hans is a superhero to the people of Norway. And Thomas feels they have to complete the documentary now in order to show the country and the world they couldn't have survived without him. And right at the end of his touching monologue, his health takes a rapid dive. And at the same time, all the birds outside start flying off in the same direction, and the cabin starts shaking. And then the growling starts. Hans can tell from the sound of it the troll's far too big and far too angry for him to be able to handle it. But he commits to the fight anyways because there's literally nobody else to do it. And then his phone rings and the veterinarian tells him the troll that bit Thomas way back at the start of the story has rabies. And that means the big troll he's about to fight has passed the rabies to all the trolls they've encountered. It also means Thomas has rabies. Naturally, Thomas shits his tiny Norwegian trousers and insists he's taken to the hospital immediately. But it's too late for that now, as the rabid Jotnar is coming over the crest of the hill in a very bad mood. Hans blasts Christian music from the Range Rover to pull the troll away from the kids, and then he gets to blasting away at the huge beast with his UV gun, but it runs out of power right in the middle of the fight. So they're forced to drive around in circles to recharge the gun and tire the beast out. Only that doesn't doesn't work out as well as they hoped it would, and then the truck's knocked on its ass. And that means Hans has to go fight the troll one-on-one. So he says his goodbyes to the gang, points them in the direction of the main road, and heads off to fire his last remaining shot of UV light into the troll's belly button. And what do you know? He pulls off a Luke frickin' Skywalker. And as they're making their way back to the road, Finn arrives to confiscate all the footage. And the movie ends just like that.
And there you have it, folks, the events of 2010's Trollhunter. Let's check out the good bits.
If this sort of thing is your sort of thing, meaning if you're a fan of Norse mythology, you're probably gonna love this movie because it delves into rich Scandinavian folklore and it showcases a variety of trolls ranging from cute and mischievous to why the hell did we throw this movie on before bed? And the backdrop for all these wonderful creatures is nothing short of landscape eye candy. The Norwegian wilderness footage in this film is the very stuff that spawned the actual folklore in the first place, and that makes this like a nature documentary with a side of colossal creature chaos, which of course makes it very easy to watch. The movie also has an understated satire you might not be expecting. The dry Scandinavian humor works perfectly with the found footage format, and that helps tie the whole thing together into an enjoyable, cohesive, believable package. The special effects in Trollhunter are shockingly impressive for such a low-budget film. The team utilized a mix of practical effects and CGI for the trolls, and during filming, the actors often interacted with stand-ins or tennis balls or just thin air to later be replaced with the hulking trolls. And finally, for the good bits section, this movie puts a really unique twist on the found footage format. And while most found footage films make you question why the hell anyone in this kind of danger would keep on filming, Trollhunter's premise provides a pretty decent justification. The very fact we're all sat at home scanning our screens to catch a glimpse of what they're seeing means we understand why they'd want everything caught on camera. This movie puts us right there in the scene with the characters, the way found footage films were originally intended to. So in that sense, you can't argue. Trollhunter has achieved its goal.
But there were some things that people questioned in this movie, so here's the shite bits.
While I think staying true to the traditional appearances of the trolls was an absolute positive for this film, some people weren't on board with the old aesthetics against the backdrop of modern-day Norway. And without previous knowledge of the way these folk monsters moved and behaved, it's understandable some people were let down by the understated imagery. Other people took issue with the Trollhunter's pacing. Some audience members found it too slow and complained there wasn't enough Incredible Hulk-style troll-smashing action. Unfortunately, that complaint's becoming a very common one, and I attribute some of it, at least, to 2023's diminishing attention span pandemic. But I digress. And finally, if reading isn't your strong suit or you just can't be asked sometimes, the subtitles might have thrown you off. That one's a matter of personal choice, so I'll just leave it there and we will call this the end to the shite bits. So, should you watch Trollhunter if you haven't seen it already? Or should you cover yourself in the DVD's stench in hopes it doesn't sense you sneaking up on it from behind so you can toss its carcass into the closest lake?
Yes, you absolutely should watch this movie if you haven't seen it already. It's fun, it's quirky, it's culturally rich, and it's full of giant frickin' trolls. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor, hit the like button and consider subscribing. It would really help the channel out. And until next time, folks. Fuck off.